Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. Coming to you from the Long Valley Studio in Washington, Utah, I'm your host, Dave Markle, and this is episode 169. Today, I'm honored to welcome back someone who's been a fearless voice in the conversation around sexual trauma, healing, and truth-telling. Shannon Porter, host and co-founder of the What They Don't Say podcast. Shannon's podcast was born out of something deeply personal, her own journey through trauma, the court process, and the long, nonlinear road toward healing. What They Don't Say is a survivor-led platform that digs into the raw realities of sexual assault and trauma, without filters, without euphemisms, and without the comfort of silence. And it's an honor to have Shannon back on the show with me. Lately, Shannon has been extremely busy creating reels and posts on Instagram and TikTok to bring greater awareness to survivor experiences, as well as centering on her own personal encounters with people who aren't necessarily aware of what to do when they are the recipient of a survivor's sexual assault experience. I've noticed the uptick in the frequency of Shannon's presence on social media, and I wanted to talk to her about that. First, to thank her for the efforts she's exerting to help bring justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault, but also to get some insight on what has inspired some of the topics that she's been covering in the reels and posts she's created, including the messy, painful, confused parts of her survivor story, as well as the critical, resilient survivor parts. Shannon talks with me about day-to-day survival, relationships after trauma, intimacy, the legal process, and many of the things no one tells you, the things that people really need to hear but often don't. She's helping to normalize the conversation. Today, we dive deep into what it truly means to say the things they don't say and unpack the layers of trauma, justice, self-trust, and healing that so many survivors carry with them every day. This episode makes a dent, so grab your headphones or AirPods, maybe something to sip on, and let's get into this courageous and interesting conversation. Here's Shannon.
Hey, SAS listeners, I am thrilled to have back in the studio with me Shannon Porter of What They Don't Say podcast. Shannon, welcome.
Hi, Dave. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be back.
I'm glad you're here. I'll be honest and transparent with my audience. Shannon and I have been talking a while before I actually did this intro, and we're just going to kind of keep up the conversation with where we left off. So yes. Part of what we were talking about was your social media presence and how much I've noticed an increase and how the content of those reels and posts are so spot on with what we need to be talking about and normalizing the conversation. And you seem so relaxed at doing that on these reels. It's amazing.
Oh,
and so
it's an illusion, Dave.
It may be an illusion, but it's a good one. And it's impactful. It's making a difference. I know, and I mentioned this to you just a minute ago. It's making an influence on me as a podcaster and as somebody who knows what trauma-informed is and how to investigate cases and how the neuroscience of the brain works. But you're bringing some really important aspects of all of that to light in ways that is so digestible and understandable and comprehensible to your audience. And I've already said thank you, but I want my audience to hear how much I appreciate what you're doing and think that you're saving lives because of it. Tell us about some of the inspiration for the topics. The whole idea of consent is misunderstood on such a wide level, right?
Completely, which is so fair because nobody has talked about it. The only education that I had around consent and sexual assault was in my 8th grade health class. We had a week-long health-focused class where it was just girls, and we spent the majority of it talking about STDs or STIs, showing us pictures of genitalia that had lice and crabs. And then there was maybe a really brief conversation about if you have sex, if you say no, and then sex happens anyways, then that's sexual assault. That was literally it. They spent way more time talking about gonorrhea than what consent looks like. I mean, gonorrhea, I imagine the scope of the problem is also fairly large. Sexual assault, I would argue, has a very different and long-lasting impacts. And not to say that gonorrhea and sexual assault can't also go hand in hand, but the point of that was just that. It's really hard to know when you've been sexually assaulted when you didn't even necessarily know what consent or sexual assault was in the first place.
You bring up a really excellent point, and that is, how do we get educated on this? And I think back to the daughters I raised, and I never had a sit down with any of them about what consent was. I told them the stuff that a cop tells his daughters. Stay out of harm's way by don't hang around bad crowds. After the football game on Friday night, don't be wandering off to some party and getting drunk because there's a risk there. And that's about it. The extent that I went to was just saying, don't go there.
Right.
Don't put yourself in a situation. Yeah.
That's Tracy Day Tomasi says that, the CEO of Callisto, is we tell these people, cover your drink, don't go somewhere alone at night. And yeah, I'm not saying that you should swing from the chandeliers and be unaware of everything. But the truth is you don't play any part in if somebody chooses to sexually assault you. So the problem there is the person who chooses to sexually assault you, not the fact that you weren't quote unquote careful enough, because maybe it might not be you that night, but it might be your friend. It might be somebody else, because the perpetrator is still going to commit that crime. It just might not be you on that night.
A rapist is a rapist.
Yeah.
Those are some excellent points. And so the whole idea of what we're talking about is, how do you talk about consent? And if you stop and think about the actual situation that men and women, boys and girls, find themselves in an intimate, quiet time together with someone, and what leads to a sexual encounter, it isn't consent if one of the people involved isn't happily engaging in where that intimate session may be leading to. Where it crosses the line is when somebody is uncomfortable and is saying, this is further than I wanted to go. And not only is it going further than I wanted to go, but you don't seem to be listening to me when I say don't do that. And I never talked to my daughters about this.
Right. And I don't blame you at all for not talking to your daughters about that. That's a really hard conversation to have.
Right.
But I think that what we've been taught, that consent is this really awkward thing. And I mean, it can be awkward, but it also doesn't really need to be. And so in moments of transitioning from kissing to close off to penetration or whatever, instead of approaching that potential awkwardness, or instead of just coming up with a better way to ask, we just sort of blow through those different gates of asking and making sure that the other person wants to be there. And in turn, we have become incredibly out of tune with the person that we're being intimate with. I think that we've really been taught that intimacy is about you, when in reality, it's about the person that you're with. And so when it's about you, you're not necessarily thinking about how the other person feels. You're not paying attention to the fact that, oh, their kisses have changed. They're not really as into it as they were a couple minutes ago. And that should be the check-in. Somebody not kissing as much or things shifting a bit, it could be a sign of their body is starting a freeze state, right?
You're right. It's an almost impossible conversation to have as a father with a daughter who's 12, 13, 14 years old. That's the last thing they want their dad talking to them about is making out.
Right.
Dad, just stop.
Right. Maybe that weight isn't all on you. Like maybe some schools should have more responsibility in this. Maybe it's just other settings where your daughters are with other people. But I think that this is something that Ray Epstein and I are talking about in our workshops, is that this is a little bit controversial in some aspects, but if we're specifically talking about cis relationships, male with female, in a perfect world, men would respect women. I would love that. But respecting women and consent don't have to go hand in hand. If you are talking about how you want to fuck somebody sideways, backwards, hit them from the back, inside, outside, upside down, you can do all of that. You can fuck somebody in the craziest way that you want to do that. You just have to make sure that the other person wants that too. And so this isn't about even necessarily changing the language around this. It's just expanding the conversation into one with consent. Does that make sense? Or
it makes
that really
perfect
important?
sense. No. And in fact, it made me go to the internet and look up the new law that France has just adopted. I don't know if you're aware of this, but it's because of the Gazelle-Pellico case that France enacted a new law. I'm going to read, it's a description of the law. It explicitly defines rape as any non-consensual sexual act, shifting the legal focus from the victim's resistance to the presence of consent. Consent is now legally required to be, quote, freely given, informed, specific, prior, and revocable, end of quote.
Wow.
And it cannot be assumed from silence or lack of protest. This landmark legislation was passed in the wake of the high-profile Gazelle-Pellico case and came into effect after being passed by both the Senate and the National Assembly. So, and this is recent. I'm not sure how recent, but
Really,
I think
it's
within the
past
last
weeks.
month. Yeah. And that's what we need to be teaching people. Freely given, informed, specific, prior, and revocable.
Yes. Something too that I think is interesting is I don't know what age your listeners are, but if you have a lot of listeners in college, I think that a lot of times we are only looking at the laws of the state, but we're not necessarily thinking about Title IX laws. So, for example, in Colorado, I have the definition here. When you talk about sexual assault from a legal perspective in Colorado, it's any actor who knowingly inflicts sexual intrusion or penetration on a victim commits sexual assault if the actor knows the victim does not consent, et cetera, et cetera. But it specifically signals knowingly does that. When I would argue that sometimes it's unknowingly because you're not paying attention enough. Right? If somebody sexually assaults somebody who's a college student, they might, from a Colorado law perspective, might not be able to be convicted. But from a Title IX perspective, you only need to have more likely than not that there was not consent. And so you have the state laws, but you also have the laws that apply to you if you're a student. I feel like those are important to look at too.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think this is critically important. And just to answer that question, I have listeners age-wise all over the board. And that's a good thing. I think that's cool. I've got high schoolers all the way up to 80-year-old men and women.
That's awesome, Dave.
Yeah, it is. It's cool that not only they're listening, but they're engaging with me. I get texts and emails with questions and just comments. Thanks for your show, because this educated me, and that's why I wanted you here today. I've seen so much good stuff come out of those reels and out of your social media presence. It's really good. So to my audience, if you haven't seen any of Shannon Porter's stuff, start looking for it. Do you have a handle for What They Don't Say?
Yes. So right now we are on TikTok and Instagram, and both of those, the username is What They Don't Say Official. What They Don't Say Official. There's no apostrophe in the word don't. That's where I've been posting all these reels, and a lot of them you had asked earlier about inspiration behind them. And for starters, I'm not an expert. I don't have a degree in psychology. I have not studied anything related to criminal justice. I'm not an attorney. So all of the things that I'm mainly sharing, I try to do a lot from personal experience or just a person who has done minimal research. And a lot of more recently, what I've been putting out are basically pieces of my journal with current thoughts attached to them. The way that I start some of these videos are actually from journal entries within a couple months of being sexually assaulted, where I have this Word document. It's like, 38,000 words or something. And I literally just every couple days or whenever I was feeling a lot of emotions, I would just write everything down on my computer, type away, didn't edit anything, lots of misspelling. One of the types of content I produce is short form video with a voiceover. And so I'll take a piece from my journal, a journal entry that I think is relating to me that week, or I'm thinking about it, and then I read that, and then I attach some other thoughts to it. That's sort of where a lot of inspiration has been coming from, those old journal entries from right after I was assaulted.
I appreciate that. I think that is such powerful stuff because it is in the moment. It's utilizing emotion that was raw when you journaled.
Yeah.
Still so relevant. Let's talk about the one where you talk about locations being abhorrent. And we did just mention the Air Force Academy. Tell me about those emotions. Help me understand more, and my audience understand more what that's about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I forgot to mention, not every piece of content is from the journal. Some of it is just interactions in the real world or thoughts that I've been having. And I think you might be referring to the video where I had a conversation with a man at a bar, and basically he was definitely trying to go home with one of my friends. We started talking about how he goes to the Air Force Academy. And I said, oh gosh, I don't really like that place. And granted, this was me after a couple drinks. So I was feeling lots of liquid courage. And I said, well, I don't like it because, my rapist went there. And there's all of this, we're putting these people on a pedestal about how they have the most integrity and they have respect and all of that stuff. And that might be true for a lot of them, but my rapist went there. And so, sorry, it's not fair when one bad apple ruins it for everybody. But in this scenario, for me, It does feel that way. For the 2 years that I was in an investigation leading up to trial, I would flip off the Air Force Academy every time I drove past it, because to me, it doesn't represent a place of people protecting our country. For me, that's my rapist. That is my rapist. And it's a physical version of having to face what I went through without having to necessarily see his face. It's just a reminder of it.
Absolutely. And that happens on so many different levels. I can tell you that it happens on the level of church, people leaving church or driving by a church and doing the same thing, flipping it off or swearing off church, swearing off God because their rapist was a pastor or a youth minister or the music director or whatever capacity, or even just another congregant. It has an impact on your psyche and the way you look at that institution. It can be anything. It can be a bar, right?
It could be a car. I hate white trucks because my rapist drove a white truck. And every time I would see a white truck, I look at it, oh gosh, is that him? It heightens your nervous system.
I think there's a lot of people who don't understand that neuro-based reflex from that trauma and that article or that item or that place. And so I think one of the things that struck me when I was in psychology classes was think about any time you've ever gotten food poisoning and you aren't ever really positively sure where you got the food poisoning from. But if you ate at a restaurant and 3 hours later, you're puking your guts out, how long is it before you go back to that restaurant? If you eat grandma's potato salad and 3 hours later you're puking your guts out, how long is it going to be before you not only eat grandma's potato salad, but any potato salad? That's the way the neuroscience of the brain works. It's an immediate reaction response to the stimuli of whatever it was that caused the trauma.
That's really well said. And I like that analogy. I'm going to add that to my repertoire of analogies. Thank you.
You're welcome, and feel free to. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's something that I think people need to be educated on, because I know you've gotten some pushback, even from the guy who you told, I don't like that place. And you were kind of laughing about his response of not even understanding why you might not like the Air Force Academy.
No, he's like, that's not enough of a reason to dislike a school because one person assaulted you from there. You know, I see the perspective. He just doesn't understand it. He doesn't understand the gravity of sexual assault. He doesn't understand where I'm coming from. He doesn't understand that for 2 years of my life, I thought about my sexual assault almost all day, every day. He doesn't get it. And that's him. But for me, I think it's a perfectly good reason to dislike a school.
It absolutely is.
I also know, I'm aware that there are other people there who are probably really, really good people. It's just my experience and the way that I am interacting with that institution now. Like, it has changed my view of the Air Force Academy. And my parents testified to that as well in court on the stand. One of the questions for them as witnesses was, has this changed your outlook on the Air Force Academy as a whole? And their answer was yes. And it's partly because on the outside, the person who assaulted me and several other women was the classic person that you would expect to be attending the Air Force Academy. Tall, strong, kind, incredibly respectful, called my mother ma'am, worked hard, had good grades, volunteered, went to church, because that is the exact person that we thought the Air Force Academy produced. We didn't think that the other component and the other side of him was a serial rapist.
Right. That value system was a complete cover for something that was horrific to several women. He was, as you mentioned, a serial rapist. He had lots of victims. It ruined lots of lives. Another reel, and you just alluded to it, is the one where you wake up, you're thinking about your rape. You're putting on your makeup, you're thinking about your rape. You're walking to class, you're thinking about your rape. Mm-hmm. How intrusive trauma can be.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. And that's really something that I don't think is talked about. And I was nervous to put that video out there because I wasn't sure if other people felt it too. But there was so many months after my assault where it really was everything. It was in between every one of my thoughts, in between everything I did. And I'd be talking to other people, but thinking about my assaults. It's really hard to live life when the constant hum in the background is rape, sexual assault, thinking about what that means to you and your experience with it. It's really hard to focus. I found it very challenging. I mean, I've never been a person who doesn't have to study for exams, but I found it really extra challenging to study for exams in college and focus on group projects and do work and sit in class and interact with other people when the back burner of my brain was really focused on this one thing that happened. And it's not just sexual assault. It's the feeling of dissociating in it. It's the feeling that I felt afterwards. My insides had been ripped out and thrown on the floor, the wanting to rip my skin off because I felt so dirty. And those are the things behind just the thoughts of sexual assault and rape. Those are the core gut-wrenching feelings. So how are you supposed to be a productive member of society when that is what is intertwined with every one of your thoughts?
And has it come to your educated cognitive awareness then that yes, this is very typical and very normal?
Yes, I know that now. And especially just a lot of people commented or messaged me saying, this is me too. And I didn't know that that was normal. Like I didn't know that that was something that everybody else experienced. And I had a friend recently who was sexually assaulted, and she came to me and she was, I'm thinking about this all the time. And I said, yeah.
Welcome to the world of being raped, right?
Yeah.
There are some good things about that too, though. And I think that's partly why our adaptive brain does what it does, and it keeps us on our toes. It keeps us aware of what our experience was and what we may do in the future if we're confronted with that type of situation again, which, as an educational side bit for my audience, is that the number one predictor that you're going to be raped is that you've been raped in the past. And there are studies on why that is. It partly has to do with what we're talking about right now, is that person's preoccupation with their past rape and how they appear to the world then because of this overwhelming sense that it's so intrusive and so permeates every aspect of our lives. The learning point for all of this to me, in talking especially to those in my audience who are in law enforcement or who use this podcast as an educational opportunity, is that neuroscience-wise, the fact that your brain does that not only is a help to maybe future encounters of somebody who's taking advantage of you non-consensually, but also in the sense that the way the brain works is to keep that in the forefront of your thought process in order to not just help you if that situation is encountered again, but in how to incorporate that into your daily life in such a way that it becomes manageable. It's part of the healing process of thinking about it to the point where you have to deal with it. You have to put yourself in a situation where you're actually seeking healing and help for those intrusive thoughts.
Well, it's making me think about people who don't face it. Because for me, like the noise was so loud that I felt like I couldn't not process it, even if it was more of a passive processing. Whereas I've known other people who have been assaulted who make themselves incredibly busy to the point where it's a way to shove it down. And so when you're talking about this idea of your body is sort of almost forcing you to face it, I think there's also people who have just completely dissociated from it in a way, or do everything in their power to do that.
David Lesak, my guest, talks about that in terms of how when you keep putting that off, it gets to a point where you can't anymore. It can either be an explosion or it can be such a controlling factor that it impacts your mental health in ways that you are forced to deal with it. You have to confront it because it's changed the way you function in life.
Even physically, you know, your body will stop. Like Jess Michaels talks about this, how she didn't really fully recognize her assault after it happened. And she spent a long time really not knowing that. And now her body doesn't rest or digest. And now she is her body has forced her to now face what happened to her.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think about how a cup only has 12 ounces in it, right? You have a cup with 12 ounces. That's all it can hold. You might start out, typically daily life is about 3 ounces of that cup has liquid in it. And then trauma happens and you're at 6 ounces. And then eventually you only can hold 12 ounces. So eventually it'll overflow.
Spills over into every aspect of your life. Absolutely. And Bessel van der Kolk talks about this a lot in The Body Keeps the Score. It's also a very prominent topic in a lot of recent research that Jess Michaels talked about too, and that is how it overtakes your life. And the research recently is showing that people's immune systems digress. They get sick more often. Their capacity for earning diminishes significantly. Their capacity to socialize, their capacity to even function. I mean, you go into the freeze mode and you don't even want to leave the house. And so there's got to be some sort of relief and release for that. And that's what your brain's trying to tell you and your body's trying to tell you. You've got to take care of this.
Have you ever heard about the economic cost of rape in the United States?
Yeah, that's part of some of the research I was talking about. Yeah.
Maybe you can link it in your show notes.
I just found something. The estimated lifetime cost of rape was $122,461 per victim, or a population economic burden of nearly $3.1 trillion. Those are $2014, not even $2025, over victims' lifetimes based on data indicating greater than 25 million U.S. adults have been raped.
Yep, that's the exact thing that I'm looking at. Yeah, there's a lot of reasons, emotional reasons to care about sexual assault, but for some reason that's hard for people to comprehend. Just thinking about almost $123,000 per victim based on lost productivity at work, criminal justice activities, other costs, property loss, damage. That's a huge issue that could almost completely be avoided, a huge cost that doesn't really need to be there if we were putting more attention towards talking about sexual assault and rape and really magnifying the problem to reduce it. It's crazy.
It is crazy. It's mind-boggling. When you think $3.1 trillion.
I think you can look at this too. If you're somebody who struggles to recognize for yourself how big of an impact it can have on you, look at the numbers. If you've been assaulted, that's going to cost you an average of $122,000, if not more. If you struggle with the emotional weight for yourself, like look at the financial weight of it.
I really want this to be educational to people. It has to be enlightening to someone to help them understand the level of impact that they're suffering through and being talked about. And I think people need to understand that talking about it is so critical. And it's another reason why I am so impressed and grateful for your social media presence and what you're doing. Another one, and I'm not remembering what the topic was, I'm remembering the visualization of you running and jumping on the bed.
Oh, yeah, this was a funny one. I'm jumping into the camera in slow-mo and with different text over the screen that are basically different responses to like when you disclose your sexual assault that survivors typically get. So, you hear, you were drinking, or are you sure that it wasn't just a misunderstanding? There's a couple other ones, but that is a lot of the norm when you disclose your sexual assault to somebody. I learned more recently that when people ask you questions after you disclose your sexual assault, and when I say ask questions, I mean things like, well, how did this happen? What were you wearing? Give me the details. Why didn't you say no? Things like that. A lot of the times it's the other person, their body is trying to protect themselves. Their body is in a state of stress when they hear that somebody that they know and care about is going through this. And so then their body's like, well, what do I need to know so that I don't put myself in this situation? And even though that's not necessarily how that works, it's somebody else choosing to harm you. It's really interesting, and how that person asking you questions in effort to protect themselves is really harmful to somebody who is disclosing their sexual assault, and not the right way to respond at all. Like, Dave, what would you say if somebody discloses their sexual assault to you and you are just so overwhelmed, so scared? What is the one basic thing that that person could do so that they respond in a good, positive way to the person who just disclosed? Like, what's one thing they could do or say in that moment that would have lasting positive impact?
Any empathic response that is sincere, non-judgmental, is helpful. And it actually keeps the conversation going.
Yeah.
And is so powerful. If someone is the recipient of a disclosure and they show empathy and compassion and an openness to hearing more, that person is going to not only keep talking, the person who's disclosed, but from that point on, their outlook for less of an economic impact, for less of an emotional impact, for less of an intrusive lifestyle where their abuse is concerned, all of that helps that person in such dramatic and dynamic ways.
Yeah.
Again, it's why I am here in this capacity doing a podcast, so that people hear this. Number one, if you're a victim or survivor, you need to know that what you're feeling is normal. And Shannon is one of the best educators on that aspect of what she's doing. But it's also to let those who haven't been raped or sexually assaulted know that there is a right way and a wrong way to respond to a disclosure.
Yeah. And just saying, I believe you can go a really long way. And I think it's hard when you hear somebody talking about this. You're probably thinking, well, I can't change what happened to them. I can't fix it. And that's true. But simply just believing them and being willing to listen can go a really long way. And you are not the jury. You are not a judge. You don't need to have details and evidence in order to believe that somebody has gone through something horrible that hurts them. Just the simple believing and being there can go a really long way.
It absolutely does. And it's so important. Let's switch topics to one more that was on my list that I want to hear you talk about is the red zone.
Yes. The red zone is essentially that campus sexual assaults, the majority of them, over 50% of them, take place between move-in and Thanksgiving. A disproportional amount of sexual assaults take place in those first few months of college. I think there's a lot of reasons why this happens, but I think that the biggest one is that there's so much chaos in the first few months of college, right? You have an influx of students who have typically never lived alone, never had access to as much alcohol or other people who are in the exact same scenario as them as they are right then and there. And all of that chaos enables perpetrators to really not only commit more of those crimes, but also to hide amongst them, hide amongst all of the parties and the social events and the newness, because college campuses really, they're not spending the time, manpower, energy, money to talk about sexual assault or to really even beyond talk about it, have resources for when it does happen, let alone consequences for when it does happen. And so it creates this perfect environment for people to commit these crimes and get away with it. It's not really about somebody being more careful, like we talked about earlier. It's really about these institutions not putting things in place to let people know that if they do something, there will be something bad that comes of it. And colleges know about the red zone, but yet they're really busy sending emails about making sure you get tickets to the football game or the social event. And they don't seem to be very concerned about the fact that that's when the majority of people who are going to be sexually assaulted in college will be sexually assaulted during that time. I never got any emails about a consent workshop or anything like that in the first few months of college.
Rape and sex assault is rampant on every college campus, and the red zone is well researched, well documented as being a extremely vulnerable time, not just for young girls, but young men too. And I was one of those going into college and being sexually assaulted by other males. And a lot of it had to do with pledging a fraternity. And the same thing happens with sorority parties and fraternity parties. It's just the fact that they're in a situation where there's more alcohol than they've ever had access to. They're with a group of people who are in the same situation they are. But there are also these sophomores, juniors, seniors who know exactly how vulnerable brand new students are when they come onto campus.
Tracy Day Tomasi said, taking advantage of somebody is code for sexual assault. And older people who do commit these crimes, they know that you don't know your alcohol limit. They know that this is your first few weeks being on campus and everything is exciting and you don't have that many friends. For somebody who is a freshman or a sophomore on college campus to have a junior guy come up to you and invite you to these more exclusive rooms in the frat house or things like that, like that's intriguing. That was intriguing for me, and that's intriguing for anybody. And they know that those are the new situations, and whether it's a conscious thing or a subconscious thing, their perpetrator mindset, whatever, but they know that. I'm a believer in the bubble. And when I say that, I mean that there's this slow, gradual conversation around sexual assault that is increasing and increasing. College campuses only talk about their sexual assault problem when it is so bad and there's so much press around it that they have to talk about it. Right. This happened at CU Boulder in the early 2000s when there was so much going on that they could no longer avoid the PR nightmare that was rape. I think that we will get to a point where the bubble will burst and every college campus will have to face the music and they will have to start talking about it and they will have to start implementing it. So any college campus that is doing it now will avoid the PR nightmare later. And when the bubble bursts, they'll be able to say, we've been doing this for years because we actually care about our students. It might take a little bit, but that will happen, not even on the university level, from a fraternity level. There's a liability from insurance, right? If you are getting sued every couple years because your fraternity men keep raping people, or if this is happening at sorority houses, insurance companies don't like that. Colleges don't like that. Maybe if you brought in somebody to have those conversations, or more willing to have them now, you could avoid that later on. And obviously you want people to do it out of the goodness of their heart for the emotional impact of sexual assault, but that's not always the reality that we're in.
Right.
I don't know if that made any sense. I felt like I got kind of passionate.
I loved it. And I think it's so informational and educational. Thank you. Are there any of those reels, those posts that you've done that I've left out that you want to talk about? I know there's so many of them, but does one stick out in your mind as being one that you're particularly proud of and glad that is out there and maybe has gotten some really good feedback for you?
One of the biggest things that I deal with is feeling like what happened to me, it's not that bad. Part of that is because, similar to you, I'm sure your experience is that you get a lot of people writing in their stories horrible, horrible sexual assaults. And it's really easy. It's a very natural human thing to compare yourself to other people and therefore other people's traumatic experiences. And I'm like, oh gosh, I wasn't raped at gunpoint. I guess what I went through really wasn't that bad. And it's really, really easy for me, and I think other people, to reduce their sexual assault to just, oh, well, it wasn't that bad because it wasn't as bad as so-and-so over there. It becomes harder to acknowledge the weight and the pain of what you've gone through. Therefore, it's a lot harder to heal from it. That's a natural thing that I deal with and a lot of other people deal with. But the truth is that all sexual violence is violent. It is all bad. It is all illegal. And there will always be somebody who has it worse. There is somebody on this earth who has the worst rape, sex assault of all time. But if we only allow ourselves to feel bad and mourn what happened to us when it is the worst, then we will never be able to mourn or grieve or suffer because of anything we've gone through. That's just not, it's not the reality. And so I really struggle with the denial aspect. And okay, if it wasn't that bad, then I guess maybe it really didn't happen. Maybe I gave him mixed signals and maybe this or maybe that. And so you go down this rabbit hole of denial if you don't allow yourself to acknowledge the weight of what happened to you. Right. So important to me. And it's something that I battle often. Even though I talk about it, think about it, went through a court case about it, it is still an issue that goes on in my head.
You bring up a really good point. And I get this a lot from people who write in to me in emails or texts and say, I thought about being on your show, but then I listened to so many episodes where what happened to your other guests is so much worse than what happened to me. And I just really don't think that my story is compelling enough or something that you should air. And I write back saying, of course your story is just as important as any other guest that's been on this show. Because if it wasn't important, if it wasn't impactful, you wouldn't have written to me about it. If it's doing any of what you have gone through too, Shannon, in terms of those intrusive thoughts and places being abhorrent, and I'm doing this and I think about it, and I'm doing this and I think about it. If it's impacting your life at all, it's bad and we should talk about it. It doesn't have to meet a standard. There isn't a standard. There isn't a, this is worse than that. When it comes to rape and sex assault, it's all horrific, terrible, terrible stuff and should be dealt with and talked about. And so I encourage anyone that's hearing me say this, if you've been hesitant because you didn't think your story was show worthy, not bad enough or whatever, that's not true. The other aspect of this, and you mentioned the denial. I remember learning this from Ann Munch, who is a former prosecutor in Colorado, and she was the director of Ending Violence Against Women. Colorado was an organization that did trainings and consultings, and I worked with Ann for several years. But one of the things that she taught was that a hallmark of perpetrator mentality is that they will minimize, deny, and blame. They'll minimize their crime, they'll deny their crime, or they'll blame somebody else for their crime. And those are hallmarks. The sad part about that, and the very ironic aspect of it, is that rape and sex assault victims do exactly the same things to themselves. They minimize their rape and sex assault, or they deny it flat out. It wasn't really rape. it was something else. It was a misunderstanding, or it was, I didn't fight hard enough. So they'll deny it, or they'll blame themselves. I shouldn't have been there. I shouldn't have drank so much. I shouldn't have gone with him. I should have. Like we talked about before, shitting all over ourselves. Stop shitting on yourself.
Exactly.
And understand that when you recognize yourself minimizing your rape or sex assault, denying your rape or sex assault, or blaming yourself for your sex assault, that is a serious aspect of not healing and not being where you should be in terms of reaching out for help or telling your story. And we should talk. You should reach out to sex assault survivor stories or What They Don't Say and talk about this, because we've got to stop minimizing. We've got to stop denying. We've got to stop blaming, and we've got to hit this head on. Talk about it. Normalize the conversation.
This is so interesting that you just said that, because it made me think about the defense attorney for my rapist. He had several defense attorneys, a few from the Air Force Academy, and then one of the top military defense attorneys. His name is Daniel Conway, if anybody wants to look him up. I don't know if he still has it on his website, but I spent a long time combing through his website prior to court. In it, it talked about the exact ways that they get these cases acquitted. It literally goes through it. Find a motive to lie. Why would the victim be lying about this? Poke holes in their moral standing, and it details every single piece out about how they defend these perpetrators. It's really similar to what you were just saying about minimizing
and denying and blaming.
It kind of goes hand in hand in a way, which is making me just think about the general systems and strategies and all the intertwining between.
I know they're doing their job. That's what a defense attorney's job is to do, is to get their client either acquitted
100%.
or as low of a sentence as they can on a conviction. I get that. That's the way our legal system is built. Innocent until proven guilty, and do everything you can to prove somebody's innocence at the expense of the victim sometimes. And that's the part of my psyche that I have so much trouble with, is defense attorneys knowing that there are rapists out there and they're defending them and getting them off.
I am totally in agreement with you around, like, this is how our justice system works, innocent till proven guilty. It is so important to have defense attorneys. It is a huge part of all of that. But the way that people can just be absolutely torn to pieces. And more recently, I read the book about the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. And there was a few victims in that trial that were anonymous. They were using their real names. And there was multiple occasions, I think around 5 or 6 times, where the defense attorney would say the victim's real name, knowing that there are reporters in the room, and just, accidentally letting their name slip. And the judge says, hey, don't do that. And there's a very clear reason why somebody who is going up against Ghislaine Maxwell would not want their name released. That's intentional. That's an intentional point to harm the victim on the stand, who is just there to try and tell their honest part of the truth. And how is that going to impact their psyche when they're giving testimony that they know all the reporters in the room know their name, and they're going to know their identity and maybe figure out where they live and who their friends are and who their family are.
Absolutely right. It's really, really sad what can happen to victims and survivors, especially in court. You said that one of the things that eventually you want to talk about, maybe even on this show or your own, is that trial process and verdicts and trials and all of the legal aspects. I would be more than happy myself, as a former detective who went through several trials, to talk about some of those courtroom issues with you.
I would love that. I would love to talk more about trial, and I want to do it justice. That's funny because,
because we're talking about
yeah, but like, the court trial was 1 full week. It was 6 days long with verdicts included, and I sat in for the majority of testimony, which was kind of discouraged. It was something that the defense mentioned in my testimony, that, Your Honor, she has been in here for everybody's testimony because she is clearly the ringleader in all of this and has roped in all of these people to talk about the sexual assault. And, Your Honor, did you know her parents offered her $10,000 not to have sex before marriage? That's not true, by the way. Not true at all. Crazy defenses. The thing is it's not Hollywood. That's how it is. Like I had said, I want to talk about it because I think it's really important to talk about it. I want to make sure I do it right. But I am also worried because I haven't read my testimony in a long time. I know that the emotional state that you're in when you're testifying about a sexual assault, it's really complex. You're wanting to say everything right. There's so much pressure to say the right thing, but you're also just trying to be honest. You're so emotional. You're staring at the person who raped you while doing all of this. Think about just the way you feel answering a question in a classroom. Okay, now you're answering a question in a room full of professionals who are analyzing the exact way that you're talking about what you went through. And that's the jury's job too, is to take all those things into consideration. And so all that to say is that I really would like to talk about that stuff soon. I haven't figured out the right way to do it because part of me wants to fully read the cross-examination and read direct examination, but I don't know if that's exactly the way to go about it either. If I could publish the record of trial, I probably would. Can I do that? I don't know.
Yeah, it's public information. Unless it's been sealed. That's the only thing that would prevent you. But if it's a public record, all transcripts are public. You'll see that in documentaries, you'll see it in movies, you'll see it in newspaper articles and things like that where people actually do quote the transcripts from trials or hearings.
Okay. And I think I just get nervous too, picking something apart.
But you're also exposing yourself to more trauma.
True. But at the same time, I so badly wanted to know. I asked my prosecutors or my attorneys, should I cry? I don't know if I'm going to cry. I don't usually cry in front of other people.
Right. It's weird. Little idiosyncrasies like that can make or break a trial, a hearing.
But that's the human experience of being in a trial, is that whatever way that you protect yourself traditionally is going to show up. And so, for Lauren and I, a lot of our experience we made it through was because of dark humor. And so I certainly wasn't making jokes on the stand, but I felt certainly this hedge of protection around, like, if you're going to ask me a stupid question and you're the defense attorney, it's going to be hard for me not to laugh or something, because that's how I'm going to keep myself safe, is by responding that way. But anyways, I guess all this is to say is that if people want episodes about court, they're on the way, but maybe send questions to me or Dave, and I don't know how I'm going to go about this, but I would love to know what the people want to know about trial, because I'm pretty much an open book.
Well, good. Shannon, I can't thank you enough for being with me today. This has been a truly amazing episode. I'm anxious to get it out there. I want people to feel free to write to me or to Shannon about any questions you have and input, like Shannon just asked for, in terms of upcoming shows about what it is like to pursue this kind of case in trial and what court feels like. Absolutely. Talk to us. Let us know. Yeah. Shannon, thank you.
Dave, thank you so much for having me. It's always a joy to talk to you, and you have so many intelligent things to say, and you have so much knowledge in this space. And I feel like you help fill things in for me, and I know your listeners, about the psychological side of all of this and the criminal side of all of this. And I'm so grateful for what you do. If somebody does want to send me a message, the best way to do that is just to go to whattheydon'tsay.com, and there's a send us a message tab. And I do check social media DMs, but if you want a response, the email is the better way to go. And it will take me a while. I will get to it eventually.
And I don't know how many months will go by, but we will do this again.
I would love to do that. Thank you so much, Dave, for having me.
Thank you.
That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. To close out this conversation with Shannon, I want to slow things down for just a moment and really honor what she shared here today. Shannon doesn't just talk about survival, she lives it out loud. She's willing to utilize her social media platforms to name the things that are often left unsaid, the moments that are messy, uncomfortable, and painful. And she does it in a way that makes room for other survivors to breathe, to see themselves, and to feel less alone. What you heard in this episode wasn't a polished story with neat endings. It was an honest conversation about what it actually looks like to keep moving forward after trauma, navigating relationships, self-trust, the legal system, and the daily work of staying grounded in a world that doesn't always know how to hold survivors well. Shannon's voice on this show and through What They Don't Say continues to help normalize these conversations in a way that matters. For all of you listening, thank you for being a part of the SAS audience, for holding space for these stories, and for keeping this work moving forward. Thank you for listening with compassion and curiosity, and for staying committed to understanding the real impact of trauma on the lives of survivors. This is why the podcast exists, to normalize the conversation, to educate, and to hold space for these stories so they can lead to justice, understanding, and change. If this episode spoke to you, please share it with someone who needs it. Keep the conversation going in your circles, your communities, and workplaces. And as always, start by believing, because we all know someone whose life has been impacted by rape or sexual assault. We'll see you next week.